Welcome back to another episode of Industry Talk with Brandon Andre, and I'm here in London at Genesis Model Management with the CEO of this company. This is Stephen. Stephen, go ahead and introduce yourself to my audience.
Thank you for having me, first and foremost. Yeah, so my name's Stephen Michael O'Hara. I'm the CEO and founder of Genesis Model Management.
And you guys have been in operation now for how long?
So we've been in operation for 5.5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's been a nice journey.
So unpack it for me. How did you guys start? And what's your origin story?
Yeah, so the origin story of this is I used to be an actor, and whilst I was acting one day, I realized whilst I was on set speaking to a few models that there were a few things to focus on in the industry, like just from their perspective. I got a lot of their feedback about how things were with their management, and I just sort of sat on the idea a little bit. And prior to that, I always had a lot of business acumen. So before Genesis, I was doing my business stuff like from the age of 15, where I was, just hustling basically. And then I started a little lettings agency called Office Spotters. But, that was when I was about 18 years old. So I had some business acumen. And from being an actor, I understood a lot about how things worked on set, and obviously got to connect to a lot of talent. So that was sort of the embryonic stage of Genesis. And then obviously once I sat down on the idea, one day I was speaking to a friend, and, we were just saying to ourselves, okay, what could we maybe work on in our lives? I think at the time I must have been like 20. And I did make it very clear to him that I believed that if I could speak on behalf of some of the talent that I've met, I would really be able to do a good job, because I had a lot of experience in sales already, and I understood a lot about the industry by that point. So, I was a very young kid, so I obviously had no idea what was in store for me later on down the line. But the concept of facilitating the best opportunities for young talent that really want to make something for themselves is something that really sold to me. Like, it's something that I really wanted to do. And I always had the philosophy that if you can positively influence as many people as possible, you're doing like a good thing. So that was pretty much how the idea incorporated. And then to make it become what it was, funnily enough, I was at that point, COVID had just started, and I was sort of strategizing, thinking, okay, well, what can I do in this period to really help the people that I was speaking to prior to COVID? Because I knew that some of the models were getting dropped from their contracts. So I thought, okay, I could start an agency where, we prioritize user-generated content, so they don't need to be in studios because of the social distancing side of things and whatnot. And then I can speak to some of my friends who own small brands but want to sell their inventory. And then those friends of mine can send the inventory to the models that I've signed, and then they can do the user-generated content, and then we can make things work despite all of the restrictions that are going on. And the opportunity just kind of presented itself, where a lot of models were falling out with their agencies, or, maybe they were getting dropped because of COVID. And I just thought, okay, in a time where there aren't many opportunities, let me try and find one. So I went and I found one with the models. And, the first models we signed really took a leap of faith with me, because I was 22. And obviously age plays a factor and experience, but I just reassured them that in this exact period, I know how to think outside the box to get them work. And then I did the same thing with the client. So, towards 2021, I had a few clients, a few models, and that's how we got started, really. Yeah.
And so you're how old now?
I'm 27.
So you're 27 years old, and I'm young, I guess. I'm 32, but I feel young. And I love what you said, because one of the biggest things that I told people that changed my business as a photographer and kind of like what I'm doing in this space is that I innovated. Into building a successful business, you have to learn how to innovate, right? I innovated during the pandemic as well. It sounds like you did as well. And you came, across this idea to build this agency. So obviously where it started is different than where it is now, because currently it's a fashion agency, but when you started, it was more of like a influencing, user-generated, content-driven type of agency using models. When I address your age, I just think it's interesting because, number one, I'm curious, like, how hard it's been for you to get this agency to be taken serious, considering how many established legacy agencies are in the market. And I think generally speaking, this is what I found for myself as well, and this is where I can relate. When someone new and young comes into the market with zero experience or not a full history of experience of decades and decades, a lot of older people tend to feel threatened because it's like, this, who's this new young thing? And oftentimes they think that we're arrogant, and realistically it's just because we're ambitious and young and we're tapped into a side of this next wave of how things are moving in advertising that they aren't really. Social media being a major aspect of that. But let's talk about how you took your agency from where it was when you started to what it is now, especially because of your age and how young you were and how hard it was to be taken serious.
Yeah. So I'm really glad you asked that question, because it's something that I rarely think about now. But if I want to track back to when Genesis started, my motto was do everything in the background and don't worry about presenting yourself as the boss or presenting yourself as the person running the agency. So I worked a lot in the background. For me, it was all about putting in the work, letting Genesis speak for itself. And the only people who would know me would be the people who would ask, who's the director of Genesis? I wouldn't market myself as that, And I felt like that was a really important step for me, because it was actually kind of hard as well, because there was a part of me, especially 1 year in, where I was very proud of what I'd done. But I did have a chat with one of my friends about it. And I said to him, I said, look, obviously I want Genesis to be taken very seriously. We've got great branding. We're building ourselves really nicely. At that point, we were representing, some pretty influential figures in the space of, influencing and whatnot. And I just thought, okay, there will come the time where I can really market myself with the agency and help the agency grow by showcasing the fact that I'm young. But I believe that the best way to do that is when the proof's in the pudding. And for me, it took about 3 years for me to actually feel that. And before that, it would just be a case of me working in the background. I remember like when Genesis was just starting, I was working 16 hours a day. I was completely like sweating it out, just making sure that the agency is looking as fresh as possible. And I was just there kind of like suffering in the background, because I wasn't getting any of the kind of added benefits that an agency director would get, where you can feel proud of the agency and really market it, and tell all of your friends. Like I couldn't do that. And it was tough, because I also realized that my background wasn't in fashion. My background was as an actor, and I knew that if someone searched my name, it would come up with my IMDb profile, but it wouldn't come up with my models.com or whatever. So in order for me to make that transition, particularly into high fashion, I just made it my mission to be the best salesperson I could possibly be on the phone. Because on the phone, there's no discriminating. No one's going to ask me about my age. No one's going to ask me about my experience. All I can do is get the best models that I can possibly get and really facilitate the best opportunities I can for them by speaking to these clients. So just to give you a little backstory, when it came to the first fashion week that we did, I didn't send any emails to start with. What I did was I got our virtual landline and I was calling from my house, getting in touch with all of these clients, letting them know about Genesis as a salesperson, not as the director of the agency. So I made it look like I was working on behalf of Genesis. And when I did that, and I was showing my willingness and real drive for the agency, I'm sure some of the clients I was speaking to were like, okay, well, this agency's pretty serious, because they've got this young kid selling like it's the next best thing. And,
can you give me an example of what you said on the phone when you were selling it?
Okay, so if I track back, an example would be, so if I called a client and Fashion Week was coming up, I'd essentially say to them, I'd say, hey, I'm just calling on behalf of Genesis Model Management. How are you? And they'll be like, who's Genesis? And I'd say, Genesis is one of the fastest growing agencies in the UK. And I'm here to contact you guys because we've got some of the best talent and I'd love to share them with you. And then 9 times out of 10, they wouldn't be interested. But the one time is worth it. So if I go through 200 phone calls, if I've got 20 people that are interested, then I've got them.
Right.
And then following on from that, my whole premise of it was, okay, I'm just going to keep sort of doing as much as I can to get a meeting with them, or at least get their email so I can send a package. Because what I never used to do, I never would send cold packages out, because I knew by doing that, I obviously would have to put a sign off on it. And I also feel like if I'm the agency director and I'm super young and I'm just sending cold emails, I felt like that wasn't the right step. So cold calling was essentially what I did. And yeah, on the phone calls, it really varied. What I do sometimes, this is an interesting point. But before I called a client, I would go on their website, go on their Instagram, check the recent work they've done, and I'd compliment them on something. So they'd know that I'm not just doing a call without research. So on the Excel sheet I had, it had every creative director, or with casting directors as well. I'd look at their recent work and I'd just drop them a few compliments, but they wouldn't know that I'm the director. They would think that I'm an employee. And they'd be thinking, wow, Genesis is really professional, because one of their employees, who sounds pretty young, knows all about my recent work. And they're calling me, like asking me for a meeting. So yeah,
name some of the clients that you did that to, because there's obviously like different variables of clients. So you were attempting at that point to get to Fashion Week. So who are we talking about that you did this to?
Yeah, I mean,
if you could say it,
because there's part of me that's a bit like, should I say? Because it's kind of like, I mean, okay, I'm gonna do some honorable mentions.
Okay.
So I'm not gonna say that I specifically did this with these people, but they're honorable mentions as the people that booked our first models. And I'm gonna start with Abigail Joby, because in 2022, I believe it was, or 2021, she was doing her first show, and because she was doing her first show, I noticed that, and then that was actually one of the points where I came into it really like transparently, because I was like, you're doing your first show, I've got my new agency, let's work together. Because at that point, it's almost like the younger generation helping each other out. Mm-hmm. So I'll give that as an example of someone where, I didn't necessarily have to go down that route of, pretending that I'm a salesperson, or really have to upsell. It was kind of like, let's just work together on it and build together, because I believe she was a similar age to me as well. So yeah.
So okay, so that's cool, and I think it's good for you to be open about that, just because when I think about who a model should turn to for an agency, right? Because that's a common question that I always get asked, Brandon. Like all these options that I have, like which one should I pick, or who should I go with? I always say examine the leader. Who's the leader? Because you'll know the direction and the vision of the agency and how the work ethic is going to be depending on who's leading the agency. And one of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking is, okay, you're building an agency, you're new. I think if I was a model, or not, if I was a mother agent, or if I'm just me, then, right, without, you guys have been 5 years in the business, but newly starting out, the first thing I would ask is, how can I trust that you know how to get me work in the fashion industry, being that you're an actor and have zero experience in the fashion world? How can you sell me in my trust in you to get me work? How did you onboard models? What did you promise them? And how did you convince them, knowing that you didn't have experience in fashion previous to starting this agency?
Good question. So the main point that I always made, and the main thing that I would really stress, is that I'm here to facilitate the best opportunities for you. That's the way I'd pitch it every time. I'd be pitching people that are 6-7 years older than me and have been modeling way before I was even, before I was even acting. So like, I was dealing with people who had 10 plus years experience, and the way I sold to them was, okay, I have these contacts already, which I generated through my time acting and my early stage of Genesis. And then I would just reassure them that regardless of whatever they hear from any other agency, I can assure them that I'm going to give them all of my time, all of my energy, and I will facilitate the best opportunities for them, because they've got their look. They, as a model, they've created that sheer quality that is already there. And what they need, what a model really needs, is someone in their corner who's willing to take those calls at midnight. They're willing to, work on different time zones. They're willing to upsell when other people would say, no, don't upsell, don't push for a higher rate. I was always that guy that would do that. I was that guy that would, really leverage the model's prowess and everything they've built to get them the best opportunities possible. I always said to the models, with me, you can be assured that I'm never going to give a rate out for you first. I'm going to ask the client for a rate because that's going to be the starting point. And I said to them, the reason why other agencies might not be able to do that for you is because they're not thinking outside the box. If I'm playing poker with you, I can get a better deal if I know what your hands are. So, and I really reassured the models that are coming on board that I know how to negotiate, I know how to sell, I know how to really facilitate good opportunities, and I'm reliable, and I'm very hardworking. And for those select models that I really wanted, I gave them all of that effort. And then there became that shift where obviously after you say it, you have to do it. And that was the sort of the second step of Genesis, because a lot of it was onboarding, but we delivered obviously to get to this point. So it just took a lot of hard work following that. Yeah.
I guess my next question would be, if I'm the model and you're trying to onboard me and trying to sell me, are you able to do it better than all these other agencies that I've opportunities to? Can you do it better than Options One? Can you do it better than Storm? Can you do it better than Next, Wilhelmina, and all these agencies? Because though you can, right, I'm the model speaking,
Yeah.
why choose you versus all of these well-established agencies who have like established accounting teams, who have established names, they already have all these clients and names, plus been in the industry? Why you guys?
If a model suggested that they might be looking to sign with another agency, my best approach to that is, I'm just going to tell you what I can do, not what they can do or how I compare to them. I'm just going to tell you what I can do. And then it's up to you as to whether you want to sign with us or not. And that approach leads a lot of models to actually leave the meeting and think, okay, he sold to me, but he's not convincing me to not consider other options. And that puts you in a much stronger position because it shows confidence. It shows that I'm not scared of these big agencies. I'm not worried. I don't need to take shortcuts. I'm just going to tell you what I can do for you. And then if a model ever mentioned the fact that they've gotten off from another agency here, an agency here, not only was I not really in a position to like actually make points, but I would also say to them, look, I'm here to get the best opportunities for you. If for whatever reason you have more confidence in a bigger agency, it's down to you ultimately. But who you're going to be dealing with at that other agency is going to be an agent who might jump ship at some point. I'm here to stay. I'm here to grow this. And when this agency grows, you're going to grow with it. And that sold to a lot of talent, because then they realized that it was more than just being a model at Genesis. You were a part of Genesis. And to incorporate that even further, I would have conversations with models outside of the modeling industry, whereby I'd say, what are you looking to do with your future? Sometimes they'd say they want to act. I'd introduce them to an acting agent. Sometimes they'd say, oh, I want to start a PT business. I'd be like, here's a nice plan for you to start a PT business. I wasn't there to just, get them on as a model and then that's it. I was there to help them grow as people. So that's how we got that level of talent at that early of a stage. So yeah.
Now I relate to that because I don't know if you're aware of this, but like this year I became a mother agent and I signed my first 2 models, and I was basically in the same situation where it's like, I've a lot of experience as a photographer, scouting people, developing people, but this was my first time managing models, and there are these 2 models, Sebastian and Joelle, who I had to also have these conversations with, and one of the models had, I think, like 2 agencies that were taking meetings with him, and one of them was presenting them a contract, and I had to have that conversation with him on basically like, look, because it wasn't like have your I'm always with anybody, always have options. That's the safest space you can be, options, right? But then once you examine your options, you have to ultimately decide, who do you like the most? Who do you feel like you can build an actual personal relationship with? And I think that that's the safest decision that you can make, because ultimately, when you have that connection with people, and it's like a real human connection, they don't want to fail you. I don't want to fail my boys, and you don't want to fail your models. Especially when you're starting out, you have more to prove. You have less to prove when you're established, because it's like, You're just another model. If we're gonna try and do the things that we do, and if nothing happens, whatever, we got other models that are making us money, and that kind of creates a situation for the new model where it's like you might not be as big of a priority because the agency has nothing to gain from you. It's just sustaining at this point. You're just there to sustain them, not to build them. And when you're a newer agency, I feel like a model, in your case, it's like, okay, we need these faces and we need them to succeed. We're riding on your success in order for us to grow and to actually make an impact in this industry. So I think like it's cool. It's obviously a risk, but that makes it fun too, because even with my boys, it's like I tell them like, look, keep your expectations low, okay? But expect that this is a risk. Like you don't know what's going to come from this, but just know that I'm growing because my brand is growing, and if I'm growing, you guys are going to grow, and we're going to break through this thing together, and we're going to succeed together. And I think like if you're that type of model that wants to go on a ride and go on an adventure, and it is exceedingly and abundantly the most exciting life experience you could have. So I resonate with kind of how you were starting out, because that's where I was in earlier this year, and still find myself, because I'm like, I don't think that I want to do more than 2 personally. But it's cool though, because I think that we would attract a certain mindset of a model, you know, and that's like to me the most important now that I am a mother agent, because now that I've, you know, these 2 boys, they started with me when I was in Miami. They actually, one of them flew out from Atlanta, paid for my rates as a photographer, and at that point it wasn't a mother agent, and then the other one was from Miami and he booked a digital session. But they already showed me that they have skin in the game, because they both invested money into shooting with me before I was a mother agent. But that action in itself told me, you guys are willing to do the work that it's going to take to make this happen, which I can work with. I can't work with models who want to do this and think that that they just want everything handed to them. Because at that point, just go with someone that's going to promise you a lie and the whole world and just try to get you signed. Go to a legacy agency and get signed with them, and just be another face on the wall that doesn't ever get work, because I can't work with that. I need someone that's going to invest money in buying new clothes, in traveling with it wherever they need to, in being able to do proper skincare, eat the right foods, which my boys have been doing everything to the T. And I need that, right? And I think that when you were starting out, you were probably attracting the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really refreshing to hear what you're saying, because obviously now I'm not a bookings agent anymore, you know. But when we started, that was the philosophy that I really embodied. Now, when you start expanding from being like a mother agency or a small representation agency, and you start hiring people, it's then your responsibility to take that ethos and bring it to other people. And that's a completely different skill. It's a completely different ball game. And back to the point about the age side of things, there was one point where it became unavoidable. When was that? When I expanded my team. Because then the first guy I hired was a guy with 15 years experience who was over 20 years older than me. That was my first hire. And then that is when I sort of let it be known that despite my age, you know, I need this philosophy to be implemented. And don't get me wrong, I learned so much from the first few employees I had. I learned a lot from them. I made sure that anyone who I employed could teach me a little bit about how to transition from being the caring mother agent with the mutual relationship to then being a caring business owner that's looking to get the same philosophy spread throughout the company whilst learning more about how to expand. And I think further to your point, there's that whole thing between a sole mother agency and then a rep agency, or someone that's both, or an agency that's both. When it comes to, you know, individuals who are mother agents, there's that whole thing, the whole way it works is slightly different, right? You know, there's a lot more of a mutual understanding, I must say. But at the same time, if you are going to expand, I think it's so important for an agency to be able to embody that same philosophy and bring it to the rest of the team. Otherwise, you start to lose that touch. And for sure, that was something that I won't lie, like at some points that was a major concern of mine. Major concern. Because if someone wasn't approaching something in the same way that I was before, you kind of feel like you're losing control a little bit. So then that's at some point you have to bring it back and remind people this is how we want it to work, because agencies can make money without having that caring approach as well. So I just think it's very important to anyone who wants to start a business and grow a business that's listening. When you start the business, you have 100% control on the philosophy and the ethos. When you start to employ other people, you delegate responsibilities that you held to your heart. And it's just very important that you make it very clear that your philosophy in your agency stands. And regardless of who comes into your company, especially if you're young and someone comes into your company and they've got experience, don't let their ethos and their mindset feed into the business. You have to stay strong. So I only say that because I have had my own, troubles with certain employees' management. It happens in companies. And for me, it's just very important that anyone who's listening that starts a business when they're young, you remember what made you start the business, the mentality that you carried towards everything, and try and make sure that you're not delegating responsibilities to people who aren't going to carry the same thing. Because once that happens, that brand that you had so much control over, you start to lose control of it. So
yeah, and actually, what comes to mind is the movie Founder. That's about the starting of McDonald's.
Yeah.
Because what we're talking about is quality control. And it's funny because my dad's a business owner and he runs a service-based business, but he's never been able to expand it or scale it because he's like, no one can do what I do. And I hear this all the time with like service-based businesses. No one can do what I do, so how do I grow this and stuff? And realistically, it comes down to being a good teacher. And if your leader is a good teacher, then that's like the best thing you can have, because the skill of building and scaling a business is one skill in itself. But then, like you were saying, like being able to teach that and deposit that mindset to other people within your team to maintain, order and consistency is an extremely rare trait. And it's a sign of a good leader and a good businessman. So, and what's funny is that my whole brand and my whole philosophy is business. Like I consider myself a business coach for models, not to remove the human nature side of like managing and dealing with models, because there is like everybody that knows me knows like I genuinely care about people, but I'm not naive, and I know that this industry is very business based, and a lot of people like to come into this industry very much idealistically, and it's not very, very smart. But so we talked about how you guys started, and now I want to talk about who you guys are today and where you guys stand in, the industry. 5 years, it's still a baby agency for most people. But where do you feel you guys stand now in the industry?
I think we stand in a really great position, like worldwide at this point, because as a representation agency, we've built our credentials and we've got ourselves to a point where, we no longer have to do that thing of selling as much to people, because our quality and our service speaks for itself. So that's been a really nice transition. I think we've been at that point for a good 2.5 years now. And in terms of the international stage, we've got a lot of models that we've onboarded and developed as a mother agency and presented a lot of opportunities for them. And, we've done workshops, helped them grow. We've brought people in to help them as well. I think that we've definitely leveled up in that sense. And it's sort of, if we want to look at the timeline of Genesis, I would say in the last 5 years, you could break it down into maybe like 4 chapters, right? And this is the best chapter yet. But of course, prior to this chapter, we had to make that transition from having influencer type models, which no one actually remembers at this point, right? Because it helped us launch the business. It helped us get to this point. But people know Genesis for the last 2-3 years probably. And in order to make that transition from the influencer side to fashion, it was really a case of me saying to myself, the name of the company is Genesis Model Management. We're a model management company. And if we're not trying to become the best model management company possible, then what are we doing? So that was the point where I spoke to the right people. I got the right things in place for the company, the right tools for us to really tap into that space. And I have to be honest, in order to do that, it really required us to get those people as well that had the experience. So not only could I teach them about the philosophy of the company and the direction, but they could teach me things as well. So it was a period of extreme growth. That's the best way to put it. And that's what's got us to this point now. And moving forward, for us, I believe that we're now at a stage where we've really set our mark, especially in the UK. And I do have plans for the agency to expand, but of course, as I said earlier in the podcast about how Genesis started, my plans are at the level where people would perceive it the same way as when I started Genesis in terms of the level of ambition. So I like to keep that close to my chest as well until I'm able to implement it. But I do have big plans for the agency, and yeah, I'm proud of where it's got to.
Now, in terms of at the point in which you guys kind of made a name for yourself, did that take for a certain model to work with a certain client or to open up for a certain show? Like, at what point did you start seeing that happen?
So I would say on the domestic stage, so in the UK, if I had to pinpoint a moment where it really switched, it'd have to be that. Once we became a patron and we were able to do our own London Fashion Week events, it set us in a different category of modeling agency. It became cool. It was one of those things where other agencies would go on the London Fashion Week schedule to plan how things were going to look or look at what shows were running that season. And they'd see that Genesis Model Management were doing an event with Soho House. And obviously, because we were there as a modeling agency working with Soho House on the London Fashion Week schedule after being in business for 2 years, that was enough to really get the right clients and models in. Because to your point, it wasn't really a case of having a standout model that did something amazing, then it happened. It was more like the agency took steps to really market ourselves correctly and bring a nice community vibe that just, it had a nice ripple effect. And from that ripple effect, we then ended up having a lot of models trust us and join us from other big agencies. And then that's how we pretty much got started, as opposed to nurturing a talent on the way up.
You know, and I think that's important for people to hear, because as you were talking, I'm thinking just like, all these modeling agencies have legacy names, and they oftentimes I feel like they don't think that they need to do a lot of their own marketing, and I think that's kind of the value you get when you're working with a new modeling agency, because when you're a newer kid on the block, you have more of ambition and tenacity to push yourself out there because you're trying to make a name for yourself. But when you're a legacy agency, you don't need to do all that work. You kind of take that for granted, which honestly is a huge setback for them, because I'm doing this model mixer event on Friday, right? And it's a new innovative way of scouting and approaching finding talent. And some agencies are, when I do this in other cities, a little bit hesitant to partner specifically. And I think I think about Next, because I was supposed to do it specifically with Next Miami, and then the owner of Next flipped out. And I don't know what happened between the office of Next Miami and the owner, but something due to like the sponsor not getting approved, and they have a whole board and stuff. But that had nothing to do with me. But I'm like, you would think that I would have all these agencies like climbing, like you guys, like when you guys reached out to me, like, oh, I want to be a part of this, right? But a lot of these agencies don't think that they have to do this, because it's like, why? But it's also like this weird thing too, a side tangent, because I think about in LA and in New York and just internationally, the biggest issue that I see with models not getting work is that they don't do a lot of test shoots, because it costs money, quality control. A lot of photographers aren't good at testing. They don't know how to develop models. But then I'm like, why don't these agencies pay photographers on salary to regularly test their models? I'm like, because they can't afford to pay their photographers. That's why they kind of do these pay test shoots and they do all these things. I'm like, but if I'm an agency owner, I would be trying to figure out a way to pay at least 5 photographers on salary to be regularly testing at high levels, right?
It's really interesting that you've just mentioned that, because I had a chat with Ilian behind the camera about this yesterday. I said to Ilian, it'd be a good idea for us to stop, chasing loads of different test shoot photographers and actually have 3 or 4 on our roster that we can pay. And I actually said this yesterday, and I also said that the next time we get a new employee, we should consider getting an employee that has the ability to do test shoots, because as you said, doing test shoots is like building your CV. So I wouldn't go to Deutsche Bank without a CV. A model going to certain clients without test shoots is going to be super detrimental to them getting work. A model's not going to be given the trust and assurance to perform on set sometimes and really get the job done in that short time frame with all of these looks if they have no test shoot shots. So it's very important. It's part of the model's development. And some agencies have started neglecting that. And I've noticed that as well, because I've seen some models at top agencies who have been on the books for a year plus and have done one test shoot. And what ends up happening is it's a loss of earnings at the end of the day. That small investment needs to be made for the long-term gain. And I'll tell you something very interesting. The first expense I ever had at Genesis was for a photographer. What I said to the models that we first signed was I would give them access to a studio for a test shoot with a nice photographer, and I paid it all. And when I paid it was with my last pennies, like my last pounds and pennies. And in fact, I had to ask my brother Chris, shout out to Chris, for a £200 loan for it. That was honestly my first actual investment, and it was the best decision I could have made, because not only did it give the tools to get the models work, it made them feel assured that we're doing what we need to do. So there's two types of reward you get from it as an agency. You're not just getting the portfolio shots, CV type stuff to get the work for the models, but you're also showing them that you want to invest in them. So it tightens up your contracts a little bit more. So it's silly to not do it. And it's really great that you've mentioned that, because it's something that I just mentioned yesterday.
Yeah, and I think the approach that especially these legacy agencies take too, it's like when we think about business, we think about like streaming and how Disney has Amazon, Disney. I think about them, right? You have these legacy names, Disney, Amazon. Amazon has Amazon storefront. Then they have Amazon Studios. I don't know what else they have. Disney has Disney Parks, Disney Plus, Disney Studios. A lot of the streaming companies are not profiting necessarily from the streaming services, but they have all these other incomes that sustain the actual business name. And I'm thinking, in the modeling space, you have all these legacy names, but their entire income is only from the modeling agency, and they have audiences. And you would think, and this is the only reason why I bring this up, is because I'm like, if I was an agency, how would I pull in money to be able to put photographers on salary, to be able to have your in-house photographers that are regularly testing models, so we can finally eliminate models not getting enough work because they're not testing. And I'm like, okay, if I'm trying to solve like the money issue, it's like they don't have enough money to be putting all these people on salary. By the way, I say salary just because I'm a photographer, and I develop models, so I genuinely believe that I'm probably one of the most important things for a modeling agency, because or me as a photographer, photographers in general, that we're the ones that develop the models. We're the ones that teach models how to perform in front of the camera. At least if you have my skill set, you do. But because we're the ones that build the image and we develop the models, we help modeling agencies make money. So a photographer, in order to do an effective job, they have to not think about surviving. They have to be able to like pay their bills, have some money to be able to have a normal, decent life. Which in fashion, a lot of people don't make a lot of money, but that's what I would do, because I know the life of a photographer, especially a broke one, because I used to be one when I was younger. And it's not fun to then think that you can spend so much time testing and developing a model and then still having to figure out ways to make money from your photography. So if an agency sustains photographers by paying them salary, guaranteeing them, consistency, then photographers can focus on developing their models effectively, to where the models are now getting produced images that are high quality for test shoot, for their portfolios, for the agencies to then market off of. So that's my mindset on like putting photographers on salaries. But I'm just saying in general, like there's such a lacking, I feel like, in diversifying agencies' ability to generate income, and it's so limiting. And for me, I'm like, a lot of these agencies have hundreds of thousands of followers on social media that they could be offering, or they could be monetizing it just from modeling. Like Disney does, like Netflix does, like HBO does, like Paramount does, like all these studios do with like their streaming platforms. What is something that these agencies could build towards, which is I think something to consider being a younger agency, because and one of the things that I was going to ask you too, if you're willing to be transparent, is like at what point did you generate enough money as a business to then be able to reinvest in it? And is all of what you've invested into this company been from the income and profits, or have you guys needed injection from investors? Like, because realistically, and I want you guys to understand this is a huge thing that you need to understand. You need to know where your agencies get their money from, because that means so much. It also means what agents they're going to put on commission versus salary, or both, because there are some agencies that are on either commission based or salary based, sometimes salary and both, but sometimes a salary based agent doesn't work as effectively as an agent that's on salary plus commission, because that agent who's on salary is only going to go to work to do the bare minimum, and they're not going to like fight for you and fend for you. They're not going to be working off hours. They're really not going to care, because they're going to clock in, clock out, boom, one and done. And that happens a lot in the US. But if they have commission as well, they're incentivized to work more. But in order for them to be able to do that, the agency has to have money in order to pay them, right? So these things are why you guys have to kind of consider and understand business, because you want to have an agency that's smart, that has an owner that's smart with business, and that is generating income, because that allows for effective team building and for people to actually be able to pour into you with more resources so that you succeed. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point. It's a really good point. As of 2022, we got our first round of investment, right? And following that, I made it my mission to ensure that the company has really good resilience, right? So regardless of what circumstances might occur, we always have the capacity to facilitate new opportunities within the business without needing to have that requirement to make more money within the business. Does that make sense? So if we, for example, just a quick one, in 2023, we upped our budget for test shoot photographers, because we have a fixed budget for test shoot photographers every month. And sometimes we hit it, sometimes we exceed it. It depends. And when we were putting that budget up, it didn't change the targets for the team. That was coming from the shareholders' pockets, i.e. me and my business partners. And I think with that base, with that dynamic, it's kind of refreshing to the talent, because there isn't that whole thing of, okay, when the agency is expanding, there's going to be a big cost to us where, there might be more higher quotas for the bookers. The bookers might direct focus away from development and new phase and more towards main board. That doesn't happen here, at least. In terms of other revenue streams, as a business owner, it is important, because you need to have a good amount of resilience to any potential issues that might come up or any potential opportunities that might come up. So from our side, we actually diversified into sports, and it's not something that we market as much, but by doing that, it allows us to kind of focus on some more big ticket deals that allow us to then reinvest into the modeling agency for the growth and development. The way it should work in a business is you've got your allocation of funds to generating revenue, and then when that revenue is generated, there must be a reinvestment into the future of the company. So they can't just be, everything can't just focus on the top bit where the revenue drivers are making money, then there's profits there. The profits then need to go into the development of the talent for the next gen. That's what is going to give a company longevity. So yeah, to answer your question, with us, it's a lot about, myself and the shareholders investing money back into the company and ensuring that if we do have plans, the plans are done very much, I don't want to say organically, because organically would imply, making the money first and using the profits to do that. But I would say in line with that, it's very important as a business owner to be able to diversify your portfolio a little bit, which I've done. And that's allowed me to really be able to have a plan for Genesis and implement it without too many questions asked. And that's a really beautiful position to be in, because sometimes as a company, you have to burn to earn. And the agency owners that aren't willing to do that are the ones that really struggle, because then they're sort of chasing their tail, putting loads of pressure on the employees to make the money to do it instead of making it happen themselves.
Right, and that matters a lot for those of you guys who are listening. A lot of you guys who are listening, this might be very confusing for you guys, but this is actually fundamental to what makes a good, successful team of agents that are representing you, is ensuring security. Because, you know, there's a lot of agencies that you guys aren't even aware about that may not even last. And a lot of agencies are struggling right now, especially because post-pandemic, everything changed for them. So you want to make sure that whoever leads the agency is smart with money and has good business acumen, which, by the way, did you go to college for business or something? Or where did you?
So I went to the University of Nottingham and the University of Manchester. My master's was business related. My undergraduate was philosophy. So I did 4 years. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Well, there you go. See, you want someone that's good with business. You know, one of the questions I do get asked, because a lot of people that listen to this aren't just models, they're aspiring agents, and some of them want to become other agents, some of them want to own an agency. But, you know, you employ agents. And I think in the UK, if someone was like, hey, Stephen, I want to become a model agent, does it pay well? What does that life look like?
It pays well in terms of the potential earnings. The on-target earnings are good, usually. Depends which agency you work for. But from my side, and a lot of people that have worked for me before know this as well, shout out to you guys. If they're performing well, I always add extra, incentives. There have been times where there's a deal, and I'm going to be open about this because, it might convince people to work here as well. But there have been times where, there's a deal that's almost going over the line and we have to stay in a bit longer. And I might say to the person, the agent handling the booking, if this gets over the line, I'm going to give like a $2,000 bonus to you. Like, this is the sort of thing. So it's really, when it's a sales environment, you have to incentivize the agents financially as well. So the way it usually works is a base salary plus commission. Now, if anyone tells you commission only, run away. Don't do commission only basis for bookings, because if you do that, then it's just not a healthy environment, because you're not actually, the other side of bookings you're not really paying attention to, and you're just following the money. Because a booking pays in two ways: financially and the value add it brings to the company. What brand is it? How much prowess does that brand have? How much is working with that brand going to benefit the model? If you put someone on a commissions only basis, they're not going to be thinking about that other side. So it's important to have that balance. But anyone who wants to be an agent, the key skills to being a great agent is solid communication, and also real confidence in your sales strategy. I obviously gave a little pointer when it came to, how to negotiate like a buyout, or, if the client's asking you for a rate, how to respond. I don't want to give too many tips to the other agencies though, but I mean, the long and short of it is, if you want to be a booker, just you've got to be really good with communication. You have to enjoy communication, because you'll be on WhatsApp and you'll have, maybe 40 messages in a day. You'll have 100 plus emails in a day. You have to really enjoy communicating with the models and making the client's life easier, but also knowing that when it's time for you to really step up and do what you can to, I'm looking here, right? And make as much money as possible for the company, you're willing to do it. I mean, if you're looking for money though, I would say in a corporate world, go into law. But there's still money there, and it's, if you're passionate about it, then you definitely can make it work. And it's not all about money. I'd rather take a 50k salary somewhere where I'm enjoying my life, as opposed to 200 where I'm not. Maybe 500 I would though, but yeah.
So, okay, from that perspective too, because we have some models that have become agents, right? What I think a lot of people, and because a lot of people here who are listening, they're either models listening to learn, or they're trying to become models, and many of them may not be, but they want to still stay in the industry, so they become scouts, or they kind of try to finesse their way into becoming model agents. A lot of model agents stay in the business for 20, 30 years. This is very much a long game thing. The longer you're in it, the more respect and credibility and opportunities there are for you to make money. Because you mentioned that you've found people that have a lot more experience, right? But you've also had people that come from the modeling background.
Yeah. So I'll break it down. For a senior booker, let's just call them a senior booker for the purposes of this, I'd be looking for someone who has experience, but for the purposes of Genesis model management and what we want to do, they need to use their intuition quite a lot. Because with us, as we're looking to grow very rapidly but organically, a senior booker must have the experience, but also apply that experience for the benefit of the agency, not just what they're doing. They can't just be focusing on their bookings. Also, if they've got a junior booker underneath them, they need to be willing to teach them and guide them. So for a senior booker, I'm not looking for someone who can just perform. I'm looking for someone who can, help manage and lead as well. That's very important on that side. And for a junior booker, it's always someone who has solid levels of, again, intuition, super hardworking, and very personable. Communication really matters in this game. I could say the same words to someone, but if someone says it with a different, body language, it might be perceived completely differently. Whoever's coming on as a booker needs to be aware of that. When they're speaking to models, you speak to a model differently to how you speak to a client sometimes, because sometimes with the model, it's about reassurance, guidance, and help. With the client, it's about providing a service, making their life easier, but also understanding that that relationship is more transactional. And you have to be prepared to make that switch between each phone call. Oh, cool. You're calling a model and you're, super friendly. And then when you're on the phone with the client might be trying to book a model that's 8K a day e-com. I don't know, that's just come to my mind.
Right.
And, they're trying to pitch for 2.5, whilst someone else who's on set's getting paid 5. And then you've got to be pretty strict with that. And yeah, it's about being adaptive. You have to change your tone quite a lot. That's just part of the game. You have to be willing to have communications and threads and all of these things going on. 100+ threads a day. If you're happy to do that and you find a thrill in that, then it's the right job for you. And also just being passionate about the industry. I love to see that in young people. And yeah, those would be the things I'd look for.
Now, in terms of building out a team within an agency, because I've never actually asked an owner of an agency about that, but I think it would be really interesting to unpack. What does a good basic foundational team look like within an agency? You have your bookers, senior agent, junior agent, but also like the scouting, scouts, the developing team. Like, break it down. What does the team look like?
Today's podcast is brought to you by me, Brandon Andre. If you're a model who wants to become a working model, then you need to enroll in my Model Masterclass today. In my online class, I teach models how to make more money by showing them how to manage their careers as a business. From getting signed, to building a portfolio that gets you jobs, to building an audience on TikTok and Instagram, then monetizing it, to learning how to win the favor from your agents and casting directors, to learning how to brand yourself on social media, and how to lure in brands and brand deals to increase your income as a model. Getting signed doesn't mean you'll get work, but learning how to run a business does. So enroll my Model Masterclass now by going to my website at brandonandrephoto.com.
In terms of structure, the way I believe an agency should work is you have to start development. So in development, that's all about the future of the agency, the talent that are up and coming, the talent that need that guidance, need that assurance. And they're not going to make the company money in the first year. There'll be an investment. But you have to make sure that in the development side, the models that we're working with have the profile, they have all of the boxes checked, and the people who are working alongside them understand that and know the mission. That's on that side. And then I'm going to go straight to the other side, which would be main board / development in between. But that's where you're looking at the money booking side of things. You're looking at the campaigns. You're looking at the big ticket stuff. You're looking at the management and booking of models where it's going to add value to the agency right now, whereas the development side is for the future. I'd break it up in those two sections. And then obviously, in development, you'd have a development booker or a few development bookers, depending on how big your agency is, someone on new faces and whatnot. And I haven't mentioned scouting yet because I put scouting separately. So that's just on that side of managing the talent that you have currently. Scouting is almost for my corporate buddies out there, it's like product development. It's like R&D. It's like research. So when you're focusing on the scouting department, it's very important to be bringing in those faces that are high value, either to the side of the agency which is booking now, so you'd be getting models that already have experience, or new faces. So that's breaking it down on the internal day-to-days of the business. And my last point on it would be essentially senior management. That would be myself as the CEO founder and my fellow directors. What we would deal with is the general strategy of the business. Every month we'd have, 5-6 hour long sessions to discuss how things went this month and what we want to do in the future. And those meetings are really important because you don't want to work so much within a business that you can't work on the business. So you have to work. So for myself, it's working within it and on it. And in order for me to work on the business, you need to have a good environment of people around you. And for those guys listening, if you want to start a business, guys and girls, if you want to start a business, you have to ensure that your team, your shareholders, you all align with each other. You have different skills. You might butt heads sometimes, but you all have the sole intention for your agency or your company to get to this level. You need to be super ambitious. You need to all be super ambitious if the founder wants the company to go in a certain direction. And you need to know how to implement these things. It's very important to have that as well, because sometimes there will be certain things that could happen at an agency, such as because you're dealing with visas, you're dealing with accommodation, you're dealing with all of these major things where if something messes up, I can't then go to one of the bookers and discuss it with him and try and get advice. That wouldn't be the right thing to do, because that's not part of his job description. He didn't sign up for that. But I signed up for that. And if you have shareholders, they also signed up for that. So you take those conversations and you make sure that your team are working in a sound environment. So for the directors, I think that side is super important, because no one sees what we do behind the scenes to make things work. But when we have these conversations, our sole purpose is to make the best environment for the team and for the models. And that involves talking about things and strategies that don't even, necessarily relate to modeling. We're talking about cash flow. We're talking about financial forecasts. We're talking about rounds of investment if we need it. We're talking about diversifying our income streams. We're talking about how to market ourselves better. We're talking about potential roles for the next quarter. These are conversations that are very important to have as well, because I've met some directors before of various companies that don't have that in place. And yeah, you might get success, but for growth and for risk management, you need that, because regardless of how well a business goes and how good you are as a founder, you'll always have times where you need to refer to that side of the business, which is on the business. You're working on the business as a whole, as opposed to the day-to-day stuff.
So you have senior management.
Yeah.
You have senior agents.
Yeah.
You have junior agents.
Junior agents. Yeah.
I guess my question is develop the ones that are new faces and focus on developing new talent. Are they considered bookers and agents?
Yeah. So with the models that are in development at Genesis, they kind of get a bit of attention from everyone, but primarily it would be the junior bookers. So the junior bookers would be the ones to attend to them, at any given point. But we don't actually separate it to that point where a model that's just joined Genesis can't contact me, for example. Mm-hmm. So even though I've gone through all of the subcategories of the business, at Genesis, I don't want to do the cliche thing of, oh, we're a family. But, do you know what I mean? This isn't a Salesforce.
Right.
But at the same time...
Which is funny, and that's how you know there's a difference between the youth and the young and the older generations, because I did interview a agency owner, and she called her we're a family, right? And I'm like, you don't want to say that in this generation, because they run from businesses that would ever market themselves as that.
Literally, it's the buzzword that no one wants to hear. We all try and handle the development side of things together. I don't say that in a way where we're all chasing the same tasks, but I guess in the whole process we're all involved. But the direct point of contact would be with the junior bookers. But
so they handle the testing with the photographers. They handle all that. Okay.
Yeah. So it'll be testing. Sometimes we might pass over some of the bookings to the junior bookers and we might prioritize those new faces. Say, for example, we get a casting and it's for an editorial. Instead of me passing it to a senior booker, I might pass it to a junior booker. And that's me trying to sort of spread the pool of work and kind of keep things fair, because I'm sure that with some editorials, they'd want a main board model. But at the same time, I think as an agency, we have to think strategically what's going to add value, because with editorials, they're often unpaid. So what's going to add the most value? Sometimes it's with the new faces. So then you'll pass it over to the junior booker and they'll work with the new faces only and try and get someone who has never, has done maybe 1 or 2 tests on an editorial. And if they do it, then, it's really value adding to the agency. So, yeah.
And then your scouts.
So with scouts, we break it down between 2 things. We've got freelance scouts and we've got in-house scouts. With a freelance scout, it would be, a case of them looking to scout models locally, and they'd bring the models to us, and I'm sure they'd bring the models to other agencies as well. And the way it would typically work is if we do decide to sign that model and the model's happy to join us, then that freelance agent will be subject to a particular fee for a model. The fees really range, I'll say the figures, but it could go from £250 per signing up to 1,500. It really depends like how strong the model is. And I'm going to incorporate the mother agents into the scouting team side of things, because even though they don't work for the company, they're a very big stakeholder when it comes to the development side of things at the agency, because there will be a lot of mother agents that we work with in Africa and in Asia that will send us some really top fresh faces. And I'd see that as more of a company collaboration kind of thing, where we're looking to get that model into, different markets. Well, obviously the UK, but sometimes we can help a mother agent really build a model's career. So I'd incorporate that as well, because for us, mother agents, especially some in particular, can kind of act like scouts as well, because at the end of the day, they're bringing on fresh faces for us. So yeah, I mean, at an agency, you deal with, you have lots of different relationships with just everyone.
Right.
It's kind of hectic, but
For those people that are watching, like, they might be wondering what's the difference between an agent that's working as a junior agent versus an actual scout.
Okay. So for a scout, the metric is to bring top quality faces to the agency, and that is their main priority, and that's how their performance is measured. With a junior booker, the performance is measured via what sort of test shoots are being booked, how those models that are currently signed to the agency are being developed, and that's pretty much as far as it goes. Obviously, there are other small KPIs in there, but primarily scouting is for onboarding of talent, and junior agents are to deal with the talent that have recently been onboarded. That would be the best way.
Yeah, and then in that case, then the mother agent is someone that has scouted the model and developed the model.
Yes.
And they bring you basically a high quality product.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is what I do. But you guys, his internal team, always do scouting, I'm assuming. Like, have you scouted models?
I have scouted models. In fact, I would say one of our, up and coming faces at the agency, Caesar, I scouted him when I was walking my dog. And, there are a few other honorable mentions, but Caesar's a guy who has really, killed it in the market. And he's such a great personality, super hard worker, ticks all the boxes, and he's got a very bright future. And I mean, he's currently living it, right? But yeah, I think with myself, I don't go on scouting trips. I don't do that personally. The reason why I don't do that is because I like to make sure that, as we said with the company structure, every part of the agency that's being worked on, I can give that person full delegation. And obviously, we all put our input into who we sign. But if I have an in-house scout, I wouldn't travel with them. I have them as an in-house scout because I trust them and I trust their intuition. But with me, if I'm going to an event or if I'm on the tube or whatever, and I see a face that's really great, of course, I'll approach them and we'll sign them. But I always like to keep the scouting side of things in the scout's hand.
So what does Genesis consider a top model?
A top model is a model that has all of the tools, and I'm going to use like the stars aligning as an analogy, and each star would be a certain tool that would make them a top model. So there are plenty of models in the world, but it's very rare to find a model that has, you know, a good sense of self-awareness. So they're able to sort of catch themselves and understand how to, you know, really take the right steps. So a top model is someone who really has taken the time and energy to craft themselves into that position. Because of course, as we all know, a model and the look that they have is part of their genetics. It's something that is sort of predetermined already. However, there's always a way to maximize your potential as a model, such as staying fit, such as
looks maxing.
looks maxing.
He said it, you guys. He said it.
Looks maxing. I mean, sometimes that comes up on my feed and it's just hilarious. Yeah, like giga chadding, giga maxing, whatever they call it.
You got any couple giga chads signed up?
No. Yeah, a few giga chads. But, you know, so yeah, focusing on what you have and making it work. So understanding the steps that you need to take to better your look for this industry. Being very real with yourself about that is important as well. And back on my point about being able to catch yourself, you know, being able to notice when you need to make a change, you know, having that element of autonomy to be like, okay, I know what I need to do today that's going to help my career. And I can look in the mirror and understand that, you know, perhaps I've been out of the gym for a while and I'm going to push myself to do that, you know, because what you don't want to do is be in a position where your agent has to tell you everything. I think what makes a top model is someone that doesn't necessarily need that as much, and someone who just gets it. They've understood and studied everything. So of course there's bits of guidance that we can give, but it's much easier if the model's able to do that autonomously. So there's that. And also what makes a top model is someone who's very available. And that's a point that I want to make, because sometimes you have top models or people who would be top models, but they don't have availability. It's very important that you're available for the different seasons where the markets are popping. You've got, if you're 1 or 2 years in, you've got to be available to, you know, go on placements to Japan if you need to for like 3 months to build your book, make your money, do your thing. You need to be, you know, ready and willing to do your 1 month placement in New York, 1 month placement in LA. Like, these are things that are really part of a model's agenda. So you've got obviously, you know, the look, the mentality, and the availability. These are things that really help contribute to someone becoming a top model. And there's also something else. And I'm going to leave the something else side as a question mark. You don't really know what it is, but they've got something. And that part is hard to explain, because I can't actually describe to you what it is that sometimes models have. But I think it's an element of seeing someone who has all of the stars aligning to be a top model.
In every single field that you could potentially do, having star power is one of the critical things. Like, someone has to have like this charisma, and sometimes that can be taught, sometimes it's natural, but I think that's what you're referring. The other thing that I noted too was aesthetic, and like I had to unpack this because a lot of people need to understand how important having an aesthetic is. Where I tell people, you want to know if you're going to be a star, show me what your room looks like. If your room is boring and it has no design aesthetic, you're not going to have an aesthetic. Who's going to follow someone that has zero style or like, you're not inspiring? I think that was the other quality. You have to inspire, you know, and it starts with your room. And I noticed that because I looked at myself and then my cousin, who's a photographer as well, but you go on her website for wedding photography and it's like she has an aesthetic, it's but it's tied into how she dresses and how her home looks like it's always been a part of her life. It started from her room, from how she dressed, then it seeped into her work, and then ultimately her website, right? And that's how it works for any, honestly, business owner. Like, unless you're hiring a designer that's creating and manufacturing this aesthetic for your company, most business owners who start a business have their own aesthetic because they first dressed well, or their room looked cool, and they have like nice apartments, or they have nice an environment. And so if you're trying to be a model who, in my opinion, is inspiring, and you want people to imitate you or dress like you, and you can sell clothes, you have to learn how to dress well, and you have to have like a style already. So those are the things that
Yeah. No, I mean, I totally agree with that. I think it's very important to, lead from the front with your aesthetic, and, be someone who can influence, because again, being a top model is about being able to get to that position where people can look at you and be positively influenced. Models who carry that element of energy, confidence, style, and then with the natural sort of ingredients that they've got via their genes or via God, or whatever you believe, they've looked at that, and they've basically mastered their craft with it, and they've maximized, not looks maxing, but they've maximized their potential by taking a prime focus on that. I think those things are super important. And sometimes you can read someone's energy from a mile off. So the people that are top models, often they have that, really positive and strong energy. And I just want to say a shout out to Kit Butler as well, because he's someone who embodies all of that. And yeah, he's like an amazing guy, really, fits all of those categories. So, and obviously Zhao, one of my close friends. Yeah, he embodies that, and he's got a really good spirit. Zhao does, and that's what makes him a top model as well. He carries all of these qualities, and even being around him gives everyone positivity. Plus, he has all of the other things, and I think that's definitely helped him in his career as well.
Now, are there some of your models that you could shout out more for people to follow on Instagram to get an idea of what this model looks like?
I'm going to give a big shout out to Caesar, because Caesar is someone who, similar to Kit and Zhao, has all of these qualities, and it comes together to make that model where the stars all align. He has the potential to really get to that point, and
What for female models?
Female models, I'd probably say Georgia Ferrari. She has a lot of prowess, and whenever she's in front of camera, she gets amazing feedback, and I think that she's someone who has a extremely bright future as well, and has been working really well recently. She opened the All Saints show in London as well. Like, she's fantastic. So yeah, those would be my two honorable mentions. Of course, there are plenty of other models that I could mention, but for now, just for the purposes of this, I'll stick to one on the women's side, one on the men's
just
side.
Instagrams that you guys can find and kind of just like look into for research purposes. Now, we're sitting in front of your roster, right? I want to know, what is the face of a Genesis model? What do you look for when you scout, and what goes into who you select to sign?
What makes a Genesis model? So behind me, I've got about a third of the models that we have at Genesis. But when we're looking at what makes someone become a model here, we look at two things primarily. One would be our own analysis of the model. We'd look at those key things, as I mentioned before. And to be a Genesis model, you don't need all of those things to be 100%, right? If there are some elements that can be worked on, it's okay, because we're here to work with you. We never sign anyone and then they already have the qualities of a top model. So as long as you feel some of those things, which is obviously the aesthetic, the look, the confidence, the style, the charisma, these are things that we look at. And someone who is generally, they come across as a nice person as well, because we're going to be communicating with you almost every day. So that's also very important. Someone that's understanding. And then there's the other side. And the other side, I don't control. No one in this team controls. And that is, what are the casting directors and brands and people in production and advertising, what are they looking for at the moment? And do you know who decides that? It's mainly the creative directors and the advertising agencies and all of the people that come up with the decisions about strategic direction for the brands that are in London. They contribute to what makes a Genesis model, because whenever we get a casting and we miss it and we don't confirm a model, I add that to our scouting agenda. So if there's a particular casting that comes in and I believe we could have secured a model for that and we don't, I'll take a look at it and I'll think, who got confirmed? And then if I see that particular model got confirmed, I'd be thinking, okay, well, that's something that we need to add to our scouting strategy. So we mix it up. It's very much focused on.
Wait, let's unpack that. So do you mean that like you'll see what faces get chosen by certain casting directors and say, okay, we need a scout along the lines of this face that they liked?
Yeah, exactly. Because I remember
Smart.
there's one particular casting director that had, really big casting. We're on good terms with them, and only confirmed one of our models. So what I did was I took you know how the casting directors do it. They'll post a picture with all of the models they casted. I did that, and I just cropped out the model that was from Genesis, and I said, this is part of our aesthetic now, even if you guys didn't think it before, because we can't just go off our own intuition. A lot of agencies go off their own intuition, but who really cares about what I think? We care about what the directors think. We care about, as in like the casting directors,
Right.
we care about what the brands think. That's what really matters, because at the end of the day, I can't just click my fingers and put someone in a particular campaign. Someone else is making that decision. And I can get some sort of scope from that by looking at the jobs that we haven't confirmed. So the good thing for me is I always find positives in a bad situation. If we confirm a job, fantastic. If we don't confirm a job, at least I've learned something about what we're missing. And then that gets added to our scouting agenda. So I actually have an Excel spreadsheet where I list it. And sometimes I'll ask for feedback. I'll be like, "What? Oh, why?" And they'll be like, we were looking for more blondes or more this. The client can be super blunt, but I'll take that information. And then by the time you get to like, I don't know, 2-3 months of doing that, you learn a lot. And I hope the agencies aren't taking my advice on that. Because that's obviously something that we do. Yeah.
Right. Now, in terms of you guys being based in the UK, I'm obviously from the United States. How would you say that the market differs here, specifically in London, as compared to New York, Los Angeles, and Milan, and just other parts of the world?
When it comes to different markets, there are different advertising strategies for each of these brands. There's a different demographic, and wherever there's a different demographic, there's different advertising, and then there's different models. So I would just say that no market is the same as another one. If I go into it specifically, I might just say things that might be kind of judgmental, because I don't have an agency in Milan. I don't have an agency in Asia. I don't have an agency in the States. So all I can say is that all of these markets differ quite heavily. And I can see that takes place. And I can see that one model might work really well in the UK, but won't work well in New York. And we've had some models that have worked well in New York, but don't work well in London. And really, it comes down to preference. And it comes down to the second point I made about the scouting side of things. Because all of us as agencies, we might think that the model's great, and that's our opinion. But the castings that are coming in and the direction that brands are taking in the UK versus other markets is all different. So I guess the long and short answer is it's just different.
But specifically in London, commercial versus fashion, what do you see your models booking more of? Like fashion jobs, commercial jobs? What brings in the money? What can someone expect to get? What kind of work can a model expect to get here?
So a model in the UK would definitely be getting commercial work as well as high fashion if they are looking to make money as well, because the money is in commercial. With high fashion jobs, there is still money, particularly with the campaigns. But in order to really strike a balance, a model that's coming into the UK, regardless of the agency, could be Genesis, could be another agency, they can expect that if they want to maximize their time here, there needs to be a balance between the commercial and the high fashion work. And what they decide to market is up to them. Because what I say to some models is, you can do JD Sports, you can do Foot Asylum, you can do all of these commercial brands. But if you want to grow and develop into a high fashion model, that's not the stuff that you're going to market. You can market the editorials, you can market the high fashion campaigns, you can market the runway shows. And if you want to make your money doing the e-com, but don't post unrec e-com to your Instagram, because if you do that, then you're changing the direction of your brand. So that's just something to bear in mind when models are coming to London. Yeah.
So you don't discourage models from taking commercial jobs if they want to be high fashion. You just tell them don't post it.
I'll tell them outright, don't post it.
Which means that you don't post them in their books.
We don't post them in their books. unless the client wants to
We're
see.
ashamed. I'm just kidding.
Unless the client wants to see that particular work.
Right.
And on our Instagram, we promote the models how we believe they should be promoted and how they would like to be promoted as well. And we don't deviate away from that. But
How do you position a model to get more commercial jobs?
so to get more commercial jobs, it would be a case of you'd have to showcase the fact that that model knows their poses and can model in a way where they're not modeling their image, but they're really showcasing the clothing. And sometimes you have to do one or two tests that do that. So one or two tests that obviously focus on the model, but it showcases how the model's able to
Like
market
lifestyle.
clothing, you know?
Where they can bring the lifestyle into the photo.
Yeah,
and-
you can bring the clothing out, you know, it's like someone who can just, they can really be
you doing a pose?
Oh yeah, no. Let me just put my hat down.
He's gonna do a little lifestyle pose for us.
But yeah, someone who can bring the value out in the clothing, because at the end of the day, with the commercial work, it's often tied in with a new product or something that's being sold online if it's e-com, and it's very important that the model knows their poses, but at the same time they can be showcased in a way where it's not just like a portrait or something that's showing that model working and showing that model's profile and how strong they are, but it's something that's actually bringing the outfit out, the designs out. If they're able to do that and it can be seen by the client, then great. But I'll be honest with you, there are a lot of clients that will book a model for commercial stuff just based off a self-tape. Sometimes a self-tape is enough, or, you know, some digitals that show that they can pose, you know, an intro video. So sometimes it's not entirely necessary to have all of the things in their book that showcase the fact that they can do commercial work. Sometimes it just takes other things, yeah.
So for agencies to make money, do they get their bread and butter from commercial gigs also?
Yes, I would have to say so. You know, the way a rate would be broken down for you guys at home is primarily a basic studio fee and a usage fee when it comes to commercial jobs. The basic studio fee typically takes up around 15% of the total fee, if not less. Now that refers to the day rate. A basic studio fee is basically the professional word for a day rate. And those image rights are what warrants a high payment. So if a client was to say, hey, I want to book you, but you're only going to be shooting 2 days. However, the usage is, you know, 10 years worldwide, Billboard, TVC, all the rest of it. So they've basically activated all of the types of usage. Then it would command an extremely high rate. You might be looking at a scenario where the day rate for modeling on that job is £500 a day, but the usage is like 25,000. So that's the way to get big ticket items. And those things, those sorts of jobs do happen frequently in London as well, because there are a lot of consumer goods that are well marketed here, you know. So it's something to bear in mind when you're modeling. You have to think, okay, if you're going to make loads of money, it's in the image rights, it's in how your image rights are going to be used by the client. And if the usage is longer, it means more money. If the usage is on different media forms, it means more money. Why? Because it means your face is going to be seen in more places. And it also means that the client has a much bigger budget than you might have first anticipated. Because if it's going to be on a TV commercial, it costs money to get on there. And sometimes, as a rule of thumb, a production company might put a percentage of the total production cost on talent. So if the budget's £1 million, it might be 100,000 that goes to talent. So these are things to all consider if you're a model and you're looking to make money.
So what's the standard commission rate here for models in London?
So typically you'd look at between 20 and 30% commission. It really depends on the agency. I think that the agencies that put more input and development can sometimes justify going closer towards the 30 mark. But typically you'd be looking at, between 20 and 30. And also it depends on the talent. If the talent is already, you know, super established, you know, some agencies might actually agree to something less, like a 15, you know, it does depend. But obviously I don't have full visibility on certain contracts out there, but I've heard that some contracts go, you know, closer to like 35, and I've heard that some contracts can be as low as 15. Yeah. So it really depends.
So they don't have like a really flat fee here like they do in the States.
No, they don't have a flat fee like the States. It varies, and I think it might be the same in other markets as
What
well.
about your mother agency split? Is it the same or does it fluctuate?
No, it's pretty fixed worldwide. Mother agency agreements,
10%.
10%. Yeah, I don't really ever see it go higher or lower. I mean, I have seen it go lower actually when I was talking to someone. They were the mother agent for a pretty big supermodel, and I know that they negotiated down to 5% because that particular model was placed at another agency and wanted to leave the MA. So the MA was like, "Oh, I'll take 5% if you stay." Yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay, so talking about fashion work now, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, just because editorials seem so, well, at least in the States, no one reads magazines anymore. I don't know how much of a difference that is in Europe and what the power is of editorial work in Europe is. So I was hoping you can unpack that and just explain to the audience. You know, I know a lot of fashion models, like they love the idea of editorials, but they don't really understand that they don't pay. And sometimes I feel like they could be just not usable, but I want to know kind of what you think about fashion editorials.
I think that fashion editorials present another form of compensation for the model and for the creative team that stems away from financial reward, if that makes sense. So I think I mentioned before in the podcast that when a model does a job, there are two forms of payment, which is the transactional amount and the amount that it helps build them as a model. And obviously with editorials, it's heavily, if not 100% balanced towards it helping the model's profile and helping the model's prowess within the industry. One thing to look at, obviously, is if a model wants to get on models.com, they need to have like accredited work. Sometimes doing these editorials can help with that. It can help boost their image. And it's kind of like the networking benefit as well. And here's the thing with editorials. The reason why they're not paid, as far as I understand from my perspective, is because they're not really used for commercial use. You know, a commercial use of an image is when an image is used for a direct revenue driving activity. So when it's an e-com job, for example, you've got the model that's doing the e-com and then next to it's a price tag and there's a direct link to give revenue to whichever brand or whichever website you're on. Now, it's similar with the campaigns that have all of these usage rights. They're being put on billboards next to the product and whatnot. So with editorials, you're dealing with kind of like a collaboration where you're working with a photographer, you're working with a different stylist, you're working with a makeup artist, and then you're the talent. There might be a few other people involved. And the chances are no one there is getting paid, but you're all working together to get that same credit in that really top magazine that's going to help elevate your profiles all together. And you'll find that a lot of the top creatives in the world have done this before. So I think it's important to consider editorials, but also bear in mind that sometimes it's not worth doing it if you don't think that that magazine holds the credentials to suit your level. So because I said consider editorials doesn't mean do it. It means when you receive that inquiry, research the magazine, research the team. Say to yourself, are we on the same level? It's not a bad thing to consider, because there are different levels in this game, especially when it comes to, you know, models, photographers, stylists. So just before you accept an editorial from your agent, or if you're doing it freelance from the creative within the team, do your research. And if they haven't given you any specific direction on where they want to submit the magazine, then it's down to you to then ask them, where do you want to submit this work? Because then you're going to get an idea of where it could end up. So yeah, that's the long answer to that. Yeah.
So who looks at these editorials though?
So with the editorials, I mean, this is a good point. Digital editorials, so when it's featured online, it can be viewed, like it gets quite a lot of visibility on models.com if it's on there. If it's on social media with like assuming that there's a strong following, then there'll be people on there that will view it as well. And that editorial can then be put in the model's book so that clients can see it. if we want to place a model at another agency, then they can see it also. And it adds to the prowess of that particular talent as a model and as a fashion model. So that can be attractive because it as I said, with that whole CV analogy, it adds to the CV. So I guess in terms of exposure, I wouldn't say that the priority of doing an editorial is for exposure, because it's not like you're going to do an editorial and then get 1 million followers. It's more like you're going to get seen by industry professionals. So if it's exposure that you're looking for with an editorial, trust me, you could do a feature in GQ and not get that many followers. But what you will get is you'll get seen by industry professionals, and you'll have that material that's really going to elevate your book to the point where it's going to be easier for you to get placed, and clients will take you more seriously. So
I feel like it's like the Instagram blue check. Like it's basically what it is. It's like verification. It helps like build the veracity of who you are, which I still kind of go back and forth on, because I think you can build that now without it necessarily. But I mean, it's different markets too. I think Europeans take fashion very, very seriously. So editorials are still held up in high regard here. In the US, I mean, a lot of working models don't do editorials. Yeah. But then what does it mean to be a working model? Are we talking commercial or fashion? So it all, I guess, it's just dependent on.
That reminds me of one thing as well. If you're a commercial model, don't fall into, I don't want to say the trap, but just like understand what kind of model you are, and don't take yourself to the editorial side if you're not an editorial model, because it's actually that's when it can hinder your profile a little bit. You know, if someone's a commercial model but they put themselves on an editorial that might not be that strong, it's not going to reflect well on their book. So that's one thing to consider as well.
Gotcha. What is your philosophy as an agency owner in regards to social media and the role that it's playing in modeling nowadays? And what do you think you guys are doing differently than what other agencies are doing?
What we're doing differently that's really helping is that we're interacting more with the models with our social media. Well, we're doing collaboration posts with the models, so that when we post the models' material, they can have it on their page as well. But more than that, we're directing the models at the agency, you know, getting them to speak about their experience modeling, you know, things similar to this, but obviously, you know, we're just doing it within a short reel. You know, we've done that quite a lot recently, thanks to Ilian, who's in the team. And that's been definitely something that set us apart, because there's a mutual benefit there, because for the agency, it shows that we're interacting with the talent, and it shows the good experiences that we're having at the agency. And then for the model, it allows them to showcase themselves and, you know, really be known by the clients and really be known by the people that follow us. And yeah, I think it's just that it's a mutually beneficial thing that we take a prime focus on. Before, we might post work and do this and do that, but I think now it's very important in this day and age to utilize social media, stay active, because the TV shows of the 90s are going to be the social media shows of the 2020s and 2030s. Like, I was on TikTok the other day, and I was so shocked that I was seeing TikTok profiles, and these guys are basically like their own TV show hosts. And you have to think about it, like, as an agency, it would be silly to not utilize that and, you know, do your own little thing. Like, why not? Like, we have access to that. If we wanted to do that in the 90s, we would have had to call up a TV station and ask for an interview, or ask our models to get on there. We can just get the phone out, record it, and post it, and yeah, like,
that's why I'll be launching with my models a series on TikTok called The Making of a Top Model. It's going to be a series of me, like, documenting how I scouted them, developed them, placed them, all that stuff. But ideally, like, I want to make this into a Netflix TV show, reality TV show series.
Wow.
Which, funny enough, my goal, I guess, I have a lot of goals. This is one of them, but it's like, if it happens, it happens. But it would be really cool to lead a modeling TV show, reality TV show, following models and just like my life and how whatever, but from a masculine male perspective. Because everything about modeling has been from women-led like Tyra Banks, Janice Dickinson, the Supermodel show with Naomi Campbell and all the legends, but it's always from like a woman's perspective. And I'm like, the industry doesn't just follow women, even though they make the most amount of money. It would be kind of cool to see like a male's perspective on this industry. I think a lot of male models who get into this industry are fearful of joining because of a lot of, fashion world can be very interesting. I'll just leave it at that. Who has Genesis Model Management worked with in terms of brands?
Yeah, so in terms of reputable brands, you could look at Prada, Loewe, Louis Vuitton. We've done work with Balenciaga. We recently did campaigns with Off-White, Diesel. Did I mention Diesel?
Yeah, no, I'm not sure.
I don't think I did. Okay, yeah, Diesel as well. With Diesel, they work a lot in London. So they're definitely a client of ours that, especially with the material that comes out, is always like super nice. And interestingly, with a lot of these big brands, we've been doing our models have been doing a lot of content that pushes more towards campaigns rather than still, which is obviously amazing for them, amazing for us. And I guess on that side, what we really look to do with our biggest clients is we build a solid relationship with them. Often with big clients, they can use a casting agency. So obviously we have that relationship with the casting directors throughout London to ensure that that's all intact. But when a brand, books directly, as in they don't use a casting agent, they just reach out to us. We've done a really good job at building our relationship with them to ensure that all of our models are being considered, and we can have an open and honest conversation with them about who they're looking for. And we, as I said before, we can adjust our scouting strategy to suit them. It was only last week we had a really major brand in the UK come to the agency, and basically I just asked, what are your main pain points when booking models, and what profiles are you looking for at the moment? And she just listed everything out. And that's the sort of relationship that we have with our biggest clients, which ensures that not only are we getting these bookings, but we're providing a service to the client that's going to help us retain them. It's our job to get as much of a piece of that pie in terms of bookings per year as possible.
So when you're working with these high profile brands, how often do you see that they look at your models' Instagrams in consideration? Like, how big of a factor is that when they are like selecting?
Honestly, I think in this market, it doesn't play as much of a factor, particularly with the high fashion brands, because you're looking a lot at the creative direction and the quality of the images and how well that model fits the aesthetic for those brands in particular. So I think the following matters a bit less there. However, when you look at some commercial brands, there's definitely a room of entry where if a model has a strong following, it entices the brand to want to work with that model, because then it's not only them booking that model for the particular brand and them using the images, they know that that model being a more recognized face is going to get more eyes on focus to the advertisement. So there's obviously that incentive there. And also, as a little bolt on for the company, if a model does have a big following, then they're obviously thinking about the potential of that model posting it to their Instagram and getting traction from there. So it really does depend. I think with the higher fashion brands, it's less important. But
which is really interesting, because I think two for sure, but I know that there are three models, I forget the Asian one's name, are from the UK, and they're probably like the blueprint for what I think models need to be doing nowadays. Kit Price and Callum Harper.
Yeah.
English models. Do you look at them at all as like a rubric for your models on like what the direction of modeling should go? Because they're high fashion models.
Yeah, so I think with Kit and Callum, they definitely carry a level of skill when it comes to their own marketing. I've seen a lot of Callum's videos in particular, and he's a very personable guy, and he's very good in front of camera. I almost feel as though you can teach that to a certain point, but he definitely has a marketable personality. And I think when we talk about models in general, it's not always going to be possible for models to embody that sort of enthusiasm. So everyone has to take a different approach. I think that in principle, doing reels and showcasing what it's like behind the scenes is very important. But I guess it can't be the same approach for everyone, because with all respect to, Callum and Kit, they've got their own style in that sense. But I think fundamentally, yeah, it makes sense to do, the behind the scenes to get the content out there. I just think with models, you could probably mix it up a bit and make the content a bit different. So
Yeah. You've been working with models for 5 years now. How many models do you have signed to your roster, by the way?
we have around 220, and in town we have 135-ish as of today. Yeah.
Okay. And
But
then
it really does go up and down depending on the week.
what's your males to female ratio?
We are about 60% male, 40% female.
Oh, so you're more of like a men's agency than
Yeah.
anything. Okay, cool. What would you say is a model's earning potential with Genesis Model Management?
So a model's earning potential depends on a few factors, but I think if we were going to break it down pretty simply, as a development model breaking their way into the industry, you're looking at, e-com rates of between 800 and 1,200 per day. And you're looking at campaigns still being pretty high, but it'll probably go into like the 5, 10, 15,000 pound range. But then when you're a more experienced model and you've got a more recognized face, either in the industry or publicly, that's when you can command higher usage fees for your image. So particularly with fragrance campaigns, if someone was to do a fragrance campaign, we did one with Diesel last year, and you'd have different categories of rates. Typically, you'd have one for faces that are a bit newer. You might have another tier, and then you might have one for recognizable faces. And for things like that, you could look at, sometimes for one job, you could look at £80,000, £100,000. It really does get up there. But for a model who is coming in as a new face, I would say that for the first year, your earning potential would be in that region of, an £800 to £1,200 day rate for e-com. And then for campaigns, yeah, you're looking at, a few thousand. But as you get into your later years, it builds and it builds. So a new face that has done extremely well, still, some might make 15k, some might make 20, some might make 50
In their first year.
in their first year. Some might make 50 as well, though. It really does depend. And then as you go on to be more established, there are top models that, can command extremely high rates and can make, millions every year. Now, with us as a newer agency, we are looking to either build talent to that point or retain talent who are at that point. But I think when you look at Genesis as an agency, in terms of the frequency of work, it depends on how, as I said before, how well the stars are aligning with their availability, with how they're, managing their look, and how we're, because we always put our models first and really push them as much as we can. And in the instance that things align, there'll be times where models can make, 15,000 a month. There'll be times where models might make 2,000 the next month, and then 500 a month after, then 5,000 a month after. But if you look over a yearly period, for a lot of models, it can and it does end up being a financially feasible thing for them to invest their time into. Just because you make 15,000 in 1 month doesn't mean that you can forecast making 15,000 every month. Obviously, it can happen, but that's just one thing to also consider.
Okay, so then last year, your top performing models, what was the range of money that they produced?
So the ranges would typically be between, like over the year, would be between 70 and 120,000 a year. So that would obviously be the gross amount of billings that they would bring in. And obviously that's something that really it's a lot of money, but you have to remember that these models, a lot of them are typically super fresh and, exciting new faces or people that already have experience. And for the most part, each one of those models would have done at least a couple of campaigns to get up to that figure.
And these top performing models are dabbling both in commercial and fashion jobs.
Yeah.
So this is a mixture of both markets.
Yeah, it's a mixture of both markets. I think that's something to make clear because, if a model's going to make a decent amount of money, it's important to obviously dive into both, because the rates for high fashion work is actually a lot lower than people might expect.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, in talking about model pay, I think one of the biggest things that models need to be aware of when they are seeking an agency is how effective an agency seeks out their models to get paid for the work that they do. So what strategies do you guys have to ensure that your models are getting paid on time and that they're, actually able to survive off of modeling?
Yeah, so that's
Not that I would ever recommend you guys surviving off of modeling, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting point because at Genesis, we've definitely gone through different waves in terms of how we deal with our clients. And when Genesis started, it was very much a case of we would work with these different clients, and we found ourselves in positions where a client would take extremely long to pay for the model services, or they might just not pay at all. And at some point I decided to make a formula to decide what sort of percentage that makes up per year, and that really helped with us, in our financial planning, because in this industry it just so happens that a lot of clients do that where they pay late. I would say perhaps 60% of clients pay late.
And here in the UK, what's the duration of time that they have before they pay?
So it's between 30 and 60 days is the typical payment terms. But in order for us to mitigate that, we've implemented a few things. So as of January this year, because there were a few clients that weren't paying on time, and there were a few times where we had issues combating these clients, like we'd file CCJs. We had someone who in our legal department would be responsible for that. But I realized that the most effective way to do it is we have a credit control team, and we use a software that credit checks our clients. And if it comes back as a negative, then what we'll do is we'll either charge a 50% deposit up front and then 50% upon the end of the payment terms, or we would just decline the client completely. And the only instance where we would decline the client is where we feel like the work also doesn't add value to the model, and we just feel like it's best to avoid that particular bit of work. But having that credit control system definitely helps us understand things a little bit more, and we've had that for a couple of months now, and it's proved to be super effective. It's definitely helped a lot of like cash flow situations for the models as well. It allows us to be in a position where we can effectively advance models a lot of money as well. When I say a lot of money, obviously within reason. So, I think when you solely rely on the agency speaking to the client to get funds, sometimes that can create too close of a relationship where they feel like they can take the piss a little bit, if I can say it like that. And it's very important to have an intermediate third party that's handling it. So that's something that obviously, whilst we've had that for the past couple of months, it's really helped with everything. It's helped with cash flow. It's helped with the ability to be able to, feel secure when we put a model out for a booking, that we're going to get, the financial remuneration, and the model is as well. So that's definitely something that's really helped. And I can definitely say, from a business perspective, at certain points within the company's lifetime, getting payments from clients has sometimes been the most difficult thing. And I'll say it here now, when we did our first and second fashion weeks, we worked with a few clients, and of those clients, over half of them actually didn't pay within 6 months. And when I tell you right now that on that board right there, we've still got a couple clients that haven't paid us in over 2 years, it's a fact. And that presents a lot of difficulty, because obviously when that happens, it's still our duty to ensure that everything's fine on the model side. And after we did that a few times, we realized that it's just not an effective way to do business. So the credit control side of things is very important, especially in an industry where sole traders can, and I don't say this with any disrespect to sole traders, but someone without a company and without assets can book a model on a line of credit, essentially, because they're getting the service, but they're not paying anything up front, and they're agreeing to terms without any collateral. So the credit control system allows us to actually check that out and ensure that we're being protected, which I have to say has been a lifesaver for us, actually, because you can imagine if someone can just start a company tomorrow without any book of accounts, without any assets, and command, I don't know, a £10,000 booking. It doesn't work like that, because then the models provided the service without any financial remuneration coming to the company, and they've also got no assets for us to basically file litigation against them. So that's a situation that we've been in the past, but now it's been completely mitigated. So
You having a business mindset, has it ever bothered you that the fashion industry operates the way it does, where it's like there's no big down payment, for an example, or like you can't receive pay the day of, or
honestly,
because that would never fly with me for photography at all. Like, in
Yeah.
fact, my clients book me in advance and they pay me in advance.
yeah, I mean, honestly, when I do think about it, sometimes I do say to myself, wouldn't this industry be easier if payments were made upon supply at the very least? But it just doesn't happen. You know, with a lot of these big clients, what the general public don't realize is there's a whole supplier portal process where you need to sign up as a supplier, and the payment terms are net 60 days, and net 60 days basically means it's not 60 days, it's 60 days, and then it's the end of the month where that 60-day lands, which is like, you know, that's a sort of policy that a lot of companies have. Unless you have like a really good credit control system in place, it can cause problems. And I won't lie, it definitely at some points has caused problems for me and the business. But when that happens, you have to just overcome it and find solutions. So I'm glad that we've been able to effectively do that. And to be totally honest with you, to your point, sometimes I do say to myself, oh, yeah, if I was in another industry, you know, we wouldn't have to have this credit line that we constantly give to clients. But it's the nature of the industry at this point, and I don't necessarily see it changing unless all of the agencies agreed to it, but then that would be classed as colluding, which is illegal in the UK. If everyone was just like, oh, we're not going to take jobs unless, you know, it's 30-day or less terms, which is kind of like that's just a little bit of business insight as to why you wouldn't be able to do that. But obviously that would be a fix, or any sort of
Or like union. Do you think about
union perhaps? But I mean, when I was 23 and barely, like, I'd been in this business for less than 2 years, or maybe 2 years exactly, I raised a few concerns to several people and I didn't get much out of it. And I mean, we started a pay next day thing back in 2022. We did that for a good few months. But as you can imagine, with this industry, doing that, it really can put the company out of pocket, and that was before we got any investment as well. But now that we have investment and, you know, we've got our credit control team,
pay next day, meaning like you pay your models in advance, or was
it was the day after the shoot. We did that for a few months.
like you would pay the model the day after, and then wait for you guys to get paid back?
Yeah. It was definitely a strong, unique selling point, but all it took was a couple bad clients to really mess that up. But it's definitely something that I think would be great. And as Genesis grows, I definitely, especially given the issues that we've had before, I'd definitely consider doing that again. But as of right now,
which is why I tell modeling agencies, diversify your guys' income and where your assets are in, because that's where, you know, you can keep your selling point, you can keep your models happy if you're able to do something like that. Yeah, I mean, I could go into that a little bit more, because there's a company that I've worked with that they're trying to kind of resolve that issue in the US. But okay, I really wanted to ask your perspective on this as an agency owner. A couple of weeks ago, H&M came out, said that they're working with modeling agencies to produce a virtual AI twin for models to basically do photo shoots internationally and all that. What is your perspective as an agency owner on AI and the potential effects and impacts it can have in the modeling space?
My perspective on the AI twins, it's not just the models that it affects, it affects the whole creative team. And that's what I have a problem with. And it's a slippery slope. With things like this, it's the moment that you open the door that you expose the whole of the industry to these sorts of, you know, shortcuts that cut the real people out of the deal. Because even though H&M have marketed it as a digital twin, and that the models have the rights to that digital twin and get profits from it without having to be on set, that actually inspires other companies to cut corners. And that's the thing that they're not considering. Because even if theoretically, so in theory, if they just decided to do that, it doesn't stop anyone from looking at that Instagram post as a business owner and saying, okay, H&M have done this, let's create AI models that don't exist, they're not real people, and use them for our digital assets. And that only needs to happen 10 or 15 times to cut jobs from hundreds of people, because some of these brands that are looking into this are booking, well, usually they'd be booking models almost every day, especially H&M. And I think it's very problematic. I believe that that's obviously on the model side, but I believe that the jobs that would be cut from that, you're looking at the stylist. So the stylist isn't going to be involved anymore, because if you wanted a stylist for an AI digital asset, it's not a styling job anymore. It's computer aided design. You would need someone who does CAD work. So, and you could get someone to do that on AI as well. Do you know what I mean? So maybe you wouldn't even get a CAD designer. Maybe it'd be no one. So you wouldn't have a stylist. You wouldn't have a photographer. You wouldn't have a set designer. And all of these things could just be done digitally, and it'd be fully automated. And I just think it's unfair, because at that point, all of those people that have worked so many years to get to that point, as well as the people that have already been in the industry for 10, 15 years, you're just throwing them under the bus and discrediting them after they've done all of that work for you.
Right.
And that's obviously a word to H&M, because they have loads of people, I'm sure, that they've worked with before, loads of people who have done these things. And I don't like the way it's being marketed as like a little small trial thing, because the fact that you've opened that door, as I said, it influences other companies as well. There'll be someone out there in the world right now that has decided to start a clothing brand. There'll be hundreds of people. A few of those brands will be successful. And of those brands, ask them if they know about the H&M thing that's going on. I'll tell you right now, they'll know about it. So in 2-3 years time, what are they going to think when they're trying to create content? They're going to think to go down that route.
No one's going to stop this. Right, AI is already taking over in so many aspects, and in some ways, when you embrace it, it's only helps you become more successful as a business owner, right? So I already have this idea that's like, this isn't something that we're going to be able to stop, but what are you doing to prepare for this as an agency owner, looking ahead, looking at the iceberg and saying, okay, this is coming whether we like it or not, because AI is taking over everything. Instead of, I mean, I get that everyone's mad. I get it, because I'm a photographer. But at the end of the day, they're going to do it, and it's probably going to be just like in the film world, where it's like, you're not going to use these special effects artists anymore, because you now have AI that can make these videos at a faster performing rate, even sometimes more effectively. So that's probably going to happen with this as well. What do we do? What are you planning to do?
Like, business is all about risk management as well. I can say what I believe about this particular circumstance, and as you're right, it doesn't change the fact that I'm, already thinking about ways to mitigate the risk of me being pushed out if this goes full steam ahead. And I've got a few ideas for that. Some involve, diversifying the business. Some points involve protecting the model's image rights. Do you know what? It's going to sound quite crude, but it's kind of like, let's think about the nuclear arms race, right? If someone had a nuke or something that's going to cause a lot of damage, even though you don't want to cause any damage, you have to create your own backup plan to basically assure yourself that in the instance that something does happen, you'll be protected, because you have that leverage in a way. And that's the best way I could describe the plan that I would take. I would make sure that whilst this is all going on, we have a plan in place that's going to allow us to be protected. Or if the world, or if the fashion world does become subject to the AI modeling nonsense, then we're not going to be pushed out, and we'll have a slice of the pie if it does happen. But obviously, that's stuff that I would like to work on in the background, because I'm still optimistic that at least for the next few years, it's not going to be something on our agenda as people within the industry. So I would just leave that there for now.
Generally speaking, are you like pro AI or anti AI, or like where do you stand with AI? Because I'm very pro AI, meaning that I use ChatGPT like every day.
Do you know what? I'm pro AI when it's not at the expense of people's careers and it's at the benefit. You could either look at it, on one hand, I don't need to get a copywriter, and on the other hand, it's like, I've just been more efficient. So rather than it being a case of, a copywriter could have been working with you, but they're not, I would say to look at it on the other side and just think, okay, well, it's helping me be more efficient to the point where I don't need to hire a copywriter, but a copywriter hasn't been put out of their job. But then I know what you're going to say next, because there will be some people that have. So I get that. Yeah, it's a tough conversation. I'm not even going to lie to you. I think because of the scale it's got to, it needs to be embraced. And where it's accessible, which is pretty much everywhere now, it should be used for efficiency purposes, not replacement purposes. And I think that's more of a moral question. I would just say to someone, don't fire your copywriter to replace them with ChatGPT, but allow them to incorporate ChatGPT so they could work twice, like they could do things twice as fast, basically.
Yeah, I mean, think that would be but I mean,
that would be my approach. I wouldn't sacrifice anyone's career over.
But you would if you're a business that needed to save on money in an economy. That's why there's so many variables to this. But I guess
I think that's okay though, because if you were losing money and you needed to cut costs anyways, you would have done it regardless. Like if there was AI or if there wasn't, you still would have cut those jobs. So I think in that instance, maybe it's justifiable. But I just think, if AI is being used for the maximization of efficiency, then that's great. But no one should ever look at an employee, then look at someone else and be like, okay, I'm going to get rid of you to
maximize profits.
ChatGPT in. I'd rather say, okay, it can be used so that you can take ChatGPT, take it to the guy that already knows what he's doing, and then he can maximize it. Because ChatGPT still requires prompts. It still requires some level of insight. It can't work fully autonomously. So I'd say that would be my argument for that.
I think the reason why I asked you specifically is because you started this agency doing something very innovative in a time where people were doing something very traditional. Mm-hmm. You embraced something that was new.
It's true. So
I'm like, okay, then you've had prepared for this next wave, next frontier of newness.
Well, I'll tell you something. I do embrace it, but not at the expense of anyone's job. So when I say that, further to my point before, it's not like I don't have AI employees. I've got 12 of them. Nah, I'm playing, or I'm not. But no one would ever know, apart from the employees here. But they're not replacing anyone's jobs, But they're there as an addition.
Yeah.
And they're there to maximize efficiency for the current team. And I think that's fair.
Did you know that there's an AI company that is going to be rolling out, allowing people to create an AI version of themselves that they could build into becoming an influencer and create content and become basically it's like you are managing influencer face that's making money on your behalf using AI.
I think that's tapped. I think I think that would be ridiculous. But
it's kind of genius, because if you think about it, right? It's like, let's say you're this person that you're ugly and you'll never be able to be popular on social media, but you know that tons of influencers can and are, and you realize, oh well, I can just use this program and I can create this person and make them make me money, and they're not even a real person. I can make them do anything, and that goes into a whole other path, because then I'm thinking about like adult content. I'm just like, oh my gosh, I've unpacked the future of ChatGPT, or the future of AI.
We're actually screwed.
We are.
Do you know what?
We are very screwed, you guys.
Oh my
Unless
God.
there's some sort of regulation. But in terms of like fashion and this industry, I've used Adobe. It's called Generative Fill in a lot of my editing, and what I'm able to do, how much time it saves me a lot of times, how many things I can fix. It is so effective, and it's so like helping me like make my product more robust and refined and perfected. But I could have easily seen this coming, where they're now like, okay, and in fact, I'll even tell you guys something, okay, because I have digital products that you guys will love as agents. I create model test shoot guides. Okay, and basically what I did is I went to all the top agencies in the world, looked at their new division portfolios, and then I kind of pulled images and fashion styles that were very consistent in all of these portfolios, and created about 7 different test shoot concept guides, so that models, because oftentimes no one knows what to do when they test, and I'm like, download this guide, and replicate what you see in the fashion styling and the movement and the lighting. And that's how you build a solid testing portfolio. So it's like the easiest thing for agents to use, download, give it to the models, do this, take it to the photographer. It also has like guidelines for photographers, makeup, hair, all that stuff, right? But initially, because this was like a new concept, it was a download, and obviously they weren't my images. And on my website, I had the covers. I use like use Canva to create covers, 3 different images from the mood boards. And for me, like they're mood boards that I was, I guess, selling, but I didn't think about that they were other photographers' work that I was using as a cover. And I was like, I don't know if this is going to be an issue. And I just waited to have someone react to it before I thought it was going to be an issue. And then someone did, a photographer came across and they're like, you're using my images to sell your products. And they're like $15, not even a lot. But I was like, you know what? That's probably right. So you know what? I need to mitigate this, but how? Because I don't have the time to recreate all these mood boards to create for these covers. Because really it's just like Pinterest boards essentially, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, how do I get around this? I was like, you know what? I'm going to see if I can use AI to take those photos from those covers and replicate them using different faces. And I was able to. So if you go on my website right now, you can see all of these test shoot concept guides, and all of the images are literally almost identical to the original like images that use a real model and photographer. But I tweaked basically the face of the model, and the picture is tweaked enough that it's not even the same image, and it's a complete different situation.
Do you know what I'm thinking now based on that? Someone could pay for someone's image rights for a campaign, and they could be like, oh, it's 30,000 for the 4th year renewal. And then if the model declines it, they could just change, they could keep the same shoot and just change the model's face. And then it's not the model's likeness.
Yeah, I mean, it's that's where regulation comes, and this is where people have to like prepare for this, because then this is where I think like agencies need to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna say this now because I've already spoken about sports. Like, you can't have an AI game of football. You can't have an AI sports star. That is why. That's my plan, right? I mean, I always wanted to do sports because I used to be an athlete, and I've been interested in sports my whole life. But that side of things definitely helps as well, to the point where whilst we are adapting to whatever might come down the line, I can also have other subdivisions of Genesis that are representing talent that I wouldn't say can't be replaced, but the replacing process is definitely going to be later on down the line, because with this whole side of things with H&M, it's scary. But I just want to assure every single Genesis model, I have a plan for you guys. If this happens, we have a plan for you guys to still make money, monetize your image the way you need to. Just be rest assured that we've got the right team for that. I'm just letting you guys know.
Also, something that you guys need to understand too, and why this is good for everybody to have, even models. This means that you as models have to build a platform, and you have to have a lasting personality. Because while they can replace your face, they can't replace the impact that you have on people, nor can they replace your audience and your brand. Okay, and that's why I push on social media all the time that you have to build a brand now. You can't just be a face. You can't just be a traditional model. And that's the biggest tip that I tell agencies as well, is like build brands. Each model needs to become a brand, which, you know, it's harder, because it's hard when these models don't have that mindset, because they're thinking of, I want to be pretty and signed. But it's like, no, because you don't even see the road that's ahead. You're going to be, you already as a model are easily replaceable. Okay, now you're going to become even more easily replaceable because of AI in the future, if there's no regulation, if we don't control this. But the only way to prevent that from happening is by having an audience, having a platform. You've built an audience. People know your voice. You've become a community leader. You're becoming someone that people can turn to. And that's what I'm doing by doing these podcasts, by coming to the UK, Paris, doing the model meetups and mixers and all that stuff. Is I've built a brand where no one can replicate my face. Not that anybody would want to, but like no one's going to be replicating me, because I've built the audience. And that's the same rubric that you guys need to do. And that's what I think everyone needs to, why this conversation is important to have, is because that's the way forward, in my opinion.
I mean, you've made a good point. Now I'm thinking, if I don't create a brand for myself, I'll get replaced as well. You know what I mean? Someone just needs to read all of my emails and all of my messages to find out how I respond, and
This
yeah.
is how we end interviews here. We just make the guests feel completely.
Yeah. We're going to start doing workshops here to encourage models to build their brand. That's what we're going to do.
Yes.
So if you join Genesis, you're not just going to be a model. You're going to be a brand, a personality.
They're going to fly me out to teach you guys how to do
Exactly.
that. See?
Yeah. We'll pay big bucks until we can replace them with AI. So,
Good stuff. Okay. Well, you know what? Thanks so much for having me here, for talking, for opening up. I think I'm very optimistic to build on our relationship and to see you guys grow. I'm growing as well. So, you know, I'm gonna be rooting for you guys to succeed because I honestly respect your acumen, your mindset, your approach. And I love it. I love that you're young and doing this. And, you know, I'm young doing this as well. And we are the future. So we will adapt to whatever changes come our way. And we've already survived a pandemic. You know, we've thrived with social media, and so ultimately, as scary as everything that comes to us looks like, we ultimately are the generation that takes it and makes something of it. So that's what you'll see us both do as we navigate the future. But thanks, man, for coming on.
thank you very much.
Yes.
My hands are sweaty as
No,
hell.
he's so
Sorry,
nervous.
bro. It's
That
hot
AI
in here.
really-
That AI talk's got me nervous. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to today's show, and don't forget to hit that follow button to be in the loop when a new episode drops. Be sure to check out my model masterclass by visiting my website, brandonandrephoto.com, or by clicking the link in my bio on Instagram at @thebrandonandre.